I call the Honourable John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a privilege and a great opportunity to take a call in this debate, sir, on the estimates for employment or unemployment, Mr Speaker, because we've just heard both the Minister and the member for Rotorua castigating the opposition that they weren't prepared to stand up and take a call in this debate. They said the opposition wasn't prepared to put their policies forward. Well, Mr Speaker, the ACT Party is very proud to support the National Party. We are a confident supply partner with the government. And, sir, and most of the legislation that passes through this House passes through with the support of the ACT Party. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, when it comes to youth unemployment, we take on the role of the opposition. If the Labour Party is not prepared to stand up and talk about what's required to address youth unemployment, Mr Speaker, the ACT Party certainly is. And, sir, youth unemployment is one of the greatest tragedies of our time, Mr Speaker, because it's largely preventable. And the Minister and Mr Macleay know that well. Sir, New Zealand has a disastrously high rate of youth unemployment. Last week, Statistics New Zealand released figures showing that the rate of youth unemployment, Mr Speaker, had risen to 27.6%. Think of that, Mr Speaker. More than one young person in four, Mr Speaker, is unemployed. And worse, Mr Speaker, more than one young Maori person in three, Mr Speaker, is unemployed. And, sir, the ACT Party, while it's a confidence and supply partner of the National Party, doesn't believe the government is taking this issue seriously. While it may have implemented multi-million-dollar schemes to effectively bribe employers to take on young people, sir, it has not been prepared to acknowledge that simply hasn't worked. The Minister of Finance can stand up at question time and defend the government's record on spending, but, sir, there have been tens of millions of dollars put into schemes to employ young people, Mr Speaker, and there's a much simpler solution. So the numbers are truly staggering. There are some 41,000 young people out of work. Enough, Mr Speaker, to fill the nearby Westpac Trust Stadium and for those people then to spill out onto the pitch. Youth unemployment is the highest level it has ever been, even after taking into account, Mr Speaker, the effects of the recession. And the biggest tragedy, Mr Chair, is that it's entirely preventable. An estimated 12,000 young people are unemployed as a direct consequence of the abolition of the youth minimum wage. Let me repeat that, Mr Speaker. 12,000 young people are unemployed as a direct consequence of the abolition of the youth minimum wage. While unemployed young people are scraping by on the dole, sir, there is a solution there which is not being taken advantage of, and they're missing out on vital work experience. Unemployment robs young people of their sense of self-respect and their self-sufficiency. There is no dignity sitting around waiting for a weekly welfare check. And that is exactly, Mr Speaker, what the scrapping of the youth minimum wage has done. Why did abolishing the youth wage push so many people out into work, I hear you ask? And supporters of abolishing the youth wage argue that doing so would give youth less than a livable wage. But no, sir, it didn't. When given a choice between an older and more experienced worker or taking a punt on a young person, Mr Speaker, lacking in maturity, lacking in experience, fresh from school, and having to pay them exactly the same, sir, as that older, more experienced person, is it no surprise that an employer will choose that older person virtually every time? One only has to talk to the employers in New Zealand, Mr Speaker, to know that to be true. And I can't believe that the Minister of Social Development, the Minister sitting in the chair right now, hasn't spoken to employers and knows that to be a fact. And I think that's a tragedy, Mr Speaker, because there is an opportunity to do something that, sir, is not being taken up. In abolishing the youth wage, the government forced young people to compete with experienced workers, placing youth at a serious disadvantage. I would ask the members in the supposed opposition, why would an employer employ a 16 or 17-year-old fresh out of school without the experience when they can employ someone with more experience and more maturity? Why would they do it? And the answer, Mr Speaker, is they're not doing it, and it's reflected in the statistics. It's reflected in the over 12,000 extra young people, Mr Chair. Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable John Boscawen.
It's reflected in those extra 12,000 young people, Mr Chair, who are denied that opportunity. And, sir, if the Labor members opposite don't actually see that, it shows you how completely out of touch of reality they are, Mr Chair. An entire generation of young people has grown up without the work experience that generations before them have benefited from. The 16 and 17-year-olds today that are unemployed will continue without that experience as 19 and 21 and 22-year-olds, sir, never having had a job. And so that's a cycle that has got to stop. The ACT Party fought tooth and nail for the youth wage to be reinstated. We submitted a private members' bill in 2010 which would have effected change and curbed youth unemployment. National, Labor, the Greens and the Maori Party voted against this. Since then, sir, youth unemployment has continued to skyrocket. It was the ACT Party and only the ACT Party who showed that they really cared about youth unemployment, Mr Speaker. And the tragedy, Mr Speaker, is the Minister and the Chair knows that, and the members, sir, in the National Party benches know that, Mr Speaker, and there are 12,000 young people sitting unemployed at home without the benefit, sir, of experience that having the first rung, sir, on the ladder would have given them. Sir, the key to getting a pay rise is work experience. It's the experience that comes from having that first opportunity. One of the great myths created by those who oppose a youth wage is that reinstating it would simply shuffle jobs from the old to the young. Sir, nothing could be further from the truth. Reinstating the youth minimum wage will create new jobs. Employers that currently can't afford to take someone on as an extra staff member because they have to pay them $13 an hour may be prepared to give a young person, an apprentice, a person in training, the opportunity, sir, Mr Speaker, at $9 an hour. The tragedy, Mr Speaker, is that this Parliament passed a law that makes it illegal for that employer to do that. Let me repeat that. This Parliament, the Labor Party, then supported by the National Party, passed a law that makes it illegal for an employer to offer a young person straight from school without the experience a job at $9 an hour. Instead, sir, this Parliament has decided to send those people to the scrap heap and sent them, sir, to work on the to register for the unemployment benefit at $4.50 an hour. Sir, Mr Macleay talked about young people languishing on the unemployment benefit. Well, I say to Mr Macleay, and I say to the national members, Mr Chair, that if you want to address this issue, actually have youth rates, actually have the courage of the convictions. The national members know that when this proposal was put up by the previous Labor government, they rallied against it, they spoke against it, they campaigned against it, and when they actually had the chance, Mr Chair, to actually do something about it, they refused. They voted against Sir Roger Douglas's private member's bill to reinstitute youth wages. And the tragedy, Mr Speaker, is the members of the National Party actually know it, because the members of the National Party are more likely to have had employment experience, are more likely to have been in business, and more likely to have actually employed people, Mr Speaker, and they know more than anyone in this House, those business people, those employers, Mr Chair, how you employ people and the economics of employing staff, Mr Chair. And if you've got an opportunity to employ someone who's mature, who's older, who has the experience, and having to pay them exactly the same, sir, as a young, inexperienced, immature youth, you're going to go for the more experienced person virtually every time. And, Mr Chair, we sit here, we talk about employment, the Minister stands up and says the opposition is not prepared to debate this issue, not prepared to put up policies. Well, the ACT Party, Mr Speaker, has put up a policy, and it's certainly one that we intend to campaign on. And if we can come back into this Parliament, Mr Chair, after the election, we certainly hope to get it through. And we certainly hope to put some spine and some backbone into the National Party government following the election. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta.
Mr Chair, I couldn't